Thanks everyone for joining in the SQL Saturdays number 10 here. Today we're going to be covering CTEs, so common table expressions. So we'll get kicked right in here. As we're getting started here, if you could take a couple of seconds and complete the survey for this week. You can see the URL at the bottom of the screen, t.ly/AATD, survey April 23 with dashes in there. So take a couple of minutes. This just helps us create better SQL Saturdays and better experience for everybody. So if you have a minute, please fill it out. That'd be awesome. Okay, so just a couple of quick introductions. My name is Brian Graves. I'm a project management consultant. I've got more than 10 years experience working in the data industry and love helping other people out as well. We have Snow on as well, Snovia, data enthusiast, currently pivoting into data engineering from the healthcare industry. She's passionate about constructing systems that help organizations achieve optimal performance and drive business solutions. So definitely appreciate Snow's help here on the comments. And also Nandu is a final year student in stats and data sciences. She's got experience in SQL, R, and SAS. All right. Okay, so this week we are going to work with the Northwind database in PostgreSQL. And so there's a URL and a little QR code here on the screen. And the URL there is t.ly/SQL Saturday DB setup. So this takes a couple of seconds to get into, but basically you want to open that up and then find the raw SQL, and we're going to be using that for SQLite Online so that you can follow along. So maybe once you have that, if you can put a all set into the chat or a number 1 or something like that, just to say, hey, yeah, ready to rock. Okay. And when you're all set there, you should have something that resembles this. It's a you want this raw SQL statement here. So you'll come to this page here, and then you'll hit the raw button. And then this is a bunch of SQL code that we're going to use in the next step. Cool. Okay, fantastic. So the next thing that we're going to do back over here is open up SQLite Online. And let me go ahead and let's see if I can't. Yeah, here's what I'll do. So I will. Okay, we're going to go to SQLite Online. Okay, so once you get here, you'll have an online platform, which basically allows you to create all sorts of tables and things like that. So let me make my screen nice and big here. Okay. And what you want to do is come down to the PostgreSQL section, hit click to connect, and then you are going to take the this raw SQL that you got from the link. Just hit Control-A to copy everything, and then we're going to drop this right into this input box here. And once you have that, there should be something like 3,900 lines, and then you just hit run. And what just happened is all of that SQL code created all of these different tables and inserted all of the data that we're going to need for the rest of the examples here. So it's a little bit of the setup. Go ahead and put a 1 in chat or a all set or ready to go. in the chat just so we know that you're following along. And if there's any questions or you weren't able to do that, definitely go ahead and ask that, and we'll get it taken care of so you can follow along. Okay. So back to the slides here. If you're not familiar with CTEs or what common table expressions are, basically they are basically temporary tables that can be used alongside a normal SQL query. So if you're familiar with SQL at all, where you're doing select statements or insert or update statements, anything that is there, these common table expressions are a really neat functionality in SQL that you can create like a separate table to use alongside that. So here's an example of a CTE, a kind of a moderately complicated one, but we're actually going to build this today. So just to kind of give you the breakdown, this is kind of it's a lot of SQL, but we'll break this apart and you'll understand how it works. So this little keyword here, this with keyword, is really the signal that this is a CTE, common table expression. And with this one, we actually have 3 separate common table expressions. We have a manager's one. You can see that little comma there on line 5 shows you that there's another CTE coming, which just starts on line 6 for your orders. And you see another little comma there. And finally, you see the latest, let me zoom in here. You see this latest order CTE. And then we run a normal select. This is just normal select statement from the database, but you can see that we're referencing all of those CTEs that we created in the first part. So that's pretty much exactly how they work. And now we're going to go ahead and build them. So to get started, I always like to kind of start with a blank slate and also start with a little bit of a question that we're going to be working to answer as basically like a business problem. So imagine that you are a business owner or a manager and you want to see a full list of all the employees and their managers, and you want to see that sorted by manager. So in this particular data set, we have an employees table in this database, and that's what holds the employees and also the managers, because managers are employees. So let's go ahead and get started here just by saying select star from employees to kind of get an idea of what's in there. Okay, a lot of data, last name, first name, so on and so forth. Okay. So what I want to do first off is get a list of all of the employees, and in this table here, in this employees table, there's a column called reports to, and this is the employee ID of the person, the employee that a particular employee reports to. So just to kind of show you what that looks like, if we said select distinct reports to from employees, run that, you can see there's some records that have a null, there's some records that have a 5, and there's some records that have a 2. So we really only have 2 managers in this data set. So that's just kind of something to kind of keep in mind. All right, let's go ahead and build out our first statement here to basically we're going to get all of the employees and including who they report to, all in one query. So first off, we're going to say select star from employees. So we're going to do, instead of select star, we're going to say employee ID. And we're going to look at the last name and the first name, and also their reports too. And get a comma there. Okay, so you can see here we have 9 employees with their names, and then the reports to column here. And if you remember from looking at this data, the distinct, you see reports to number 2 and reports to number 5, and then there's a null. So just kind of looking at this data real quick, we can see that there's a bunch of people that report to number 2, who's Andrew Fuller. Andrew Fuller doesn't report to anybody, so that's like the top manager or the top employee here. And then you can see there's some people that report to number 5, who's this Stephen Buchanan. So those are our 2 managers. So just again, to kind of keep in mind as we're building this out, we should expect to see that. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to basically turn this into a like a manager CTE, or a manager table that I can then reference throughout my query. So we're going to get started here with this with command. We'll say manager CTE as, and this is the syntax. So this basically creates the common table expression. You just kind of wrap this with your parentheses, use this with keyword, and that's the syntax. And then this is basically your new CTE name that you can reference. Okay, and just to make this a little bit clearer, because I just basically turned this into a manager CTE, I'm going to make this as manager ID. And this one is as manager last, as manager first. Because the next thing I'm going to do is get a bunch of employee information from the same table and then join them up so I can reference the manager CTE plus my employee table all in one together. So here we go. We're going to say select last name as employee last, first name as employee first, and we're going to select that from employees. And we'll give that as an alias E. Okay, and we're going to join this up. I will do a left join on left join the manager CTE, and we'll give that an alias of M on E dot reports to. So this is now we're going to take the this reports to field from the employee, that's who they report to, and we're going to match that up to our brand new manager CTE equals M dot manager ID. And now, since we've joined up those two, we've joined up the CTE and the select statement with this connection, with this relationship, we can now query any of those columns from the CTE. So we're going to say manager last and manager manager first. And let's run this and see what we get. Very cool. So you can see that Nancy DeVolio reports to Andrew Fuller. Andrew Fuller doesn't report to anybody. Janet, Margaret, Stephen all report to Andrew. Michael, Robert, Laura, and Anne report to Steve Buchanan or Andrew Fuller. So that's a very, very basic CTE, the common table expression, but it gives a good handle on how they work and why you would want to use them. And the power really comes as you build out a little bit more complex. So I'm going to pause right there. Does anybody have if there's any questions out there? If not, we can just move on to the next one. Cool. Not seeing any questions, so we'll just kind of move on here. This is really great, but what if we wanted to do some include additional data in this report? Like maybe this is a pretty good report, but to see kind of the employee breakdown, but we want to see additional things like perhaps the number of orders that employee has processed, or perhaps even their most recent order date that they were involved in. Could be other useful information for a manager. So let's go ahead and do that. And just to kind of get started with a business problem here. So problem number 2, as a manager, I want to see a full list of employees and their managers sorted by manager. Oh, we forgot that one in the first one, but we'll take care of it now. Including order count and most recent order date. Okay, so a couple of additional things that we need to pull in, which we're going to do through a CTE. So since we already have this manager query kind of working, I'm just going to copy this over. This new tab here. Okay, first off, we forgot to do the sorting by manager. So I'm actually going to rearrange this a little bit and organize it here. So we're going to move up this manager last and first. I'm going to want that to be in the beginning of my report. And okay. And then we're going to just add an order by, just like I would normally would in any other typical SQL. And we will order by manager m dot manager last. Fantastic. It's nice to see the Steve Buchanan's there, and then Andrew Fuller, and then lastly, nobody. Okay, perfect. So the next thing I want to do is add in employees order count. All right, so if I look at my tables, I see an order table here, and sure enough, I see the employee ID. So that's a good sign. That means I can join up employees and this order table, and I will be able to get a good count. So using our same common table expression syntax here, I'm just going to add a comma to say, all right, I have another one coming up, another CTE coming. So we're going to call this one orders underscore CTE as, and then what's the SQL that I can create to get a count of my orders by employee ID. That's what I'm going to be building. So select count of your order ID and the employee ID, underline, for each employee ID from orders. And we are going to group by, because we're doing an aggregation function, a count on this. We have to include a group by function on this, or clause, group by employee ID. All right, and just to kind of clean this up, I'm actually going to put employee ID first. Doesn't really matter, but just looks a lot more natural this way. So for every employee ID, how many orders do they have? And okay, so that should be pretty good. And now all I have to do is go back and join up this CTE with my query. So I'm going to do another left join on orders CTE as O for an alias there on E dot employee ID equals O dot employee underscore ID. Okay. So now I've joined those up, and now I need to select which column I want, which is this order count. Actually, let's give this a good name as order count, and we'll make it emp order count, so it's really crystal clear what this is. Let's go ahead and bring this into our select statement here. We're going to bring in O, which is the orders CTE, and which column do we want? It's the emp order count. And that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and run this. Nice. Cool. Okay. So we have Michael Suyama, who reports up to Stephen Buchanan, has 67 orders. And as I'm building these out, I always like to just kind of do a spot check. So I'm going to create a quick another query here. Let's bring this in. So I'm looking at just my orders CTE. I want to make sure that 67 is accurate for Michael here, because if it's not, if I screwed something up, it's good to know it now. Okay, and we're going to add in a where employee okay, I just realized I don't have employee ID in that query. So let's go ahead and actually bring in the employee ID in this query, so I can actually see the employee ID. Okay, so Michael is employee number 6. So let's go back up here. Equals 6. I'm going to get rid of this aggregation too, because I want to see the raw data. And cool. So for employee ID 6, which is Michael, we have a lot of records there. Let's go ahead and add that aggregation back in. I guess I needed that. There we go. Employee ID number 6 shows us 67. So it's always good to just kind of do a spot check. Okay, back to our mega CTE here. The last question that we wanted to answer was including the employee's order count and their most recent order date. Okay, so back over to orders, I can certainly see that we have order date there. So I'm going to create a new CTE. And we add a comma here because we're going to add in a new CTE. So this one is called latest order CTE. Okay, the parentheses. And then, all right, so how would I get the most recent order date for each employee ID? So this one we're going to do select, and we want every employee ID. Again, same deal as the orders. Instead of doing a count aggregation, we're going to do a max order date, the most recent one, as latest order date from orders again. We're going to group by employee ID. Okay, cool. So now we're just going to join this up again, as we've already done a couple of times. Left join on the latest order CTE as L, give it that alias. And again, we're going to join on the employee table. Employee ID equals L dot employee ID. And now we need to come back up here and bring in from that CTE, we want this column in there. So let's go ahead and bring in L dot latest order date. And go ahead and run this. And we have an error, which is okay. Okay, I can see here I missed the on phrase there. So just a syntax error. And here we go. Let's take a look at what we got. So Michael Suyama, employee ID 6, has 67 orders, and his latest order date was April 23, 1998. Jeez. What is that, like 24 years ago or something to the date? That's kind of interesting. So that is a good overview of how common table expressions work. You can see here that we were able to join to multiple tables and use them. One question that a lot of people have is, are there other ways to do this kind of a thing? And the answer is definitely yes. There's lots of different ways to do this. You could do everything from actually create like a separate table or a separate database view or something. So that's one way to do it. A second way to do it is using subqueries. You can certainly do a lot of this in subqueries, but those can sometimes be less efficient, harder to read, harder to maintain. So this common table expression is a really nice way to do that. The other thing is that you can reuse these common table expressions throughout the SQL statement, throughout a SQL query, whereas subqueries, you're pretty much locked into exactly what you have coded. I could add a column up here and then reference it. So for example, I could actually combine these two because they're really pulling from the same table. But even if they weren't pulling from the same table, you could expand them and then just have like one CTE or multiple CTEs if you wanted to. But I could have gotten a order count, and I could have gotten the max order date because I'm aggregated by the same column. I could have done this in one single CTE, whereas I might have needed to do that in two separate subqueries. So that would be potentially less efficient. So it's definitely a good skill to have. So I'll pause there if there's any questions out there. If not, I want to do a little bit more on some cleanup, and then we can kind of wrap it for this week. If there's any questions, you go ahead and drop them now. In terms of cleanup, what I want to do is I don't like how how the manager name is kind of broken out this way with first and last. So I'm going to combine those. I'm also going to include the manager's employee ID in here and do a similar thing for the employee name. So basically just instead of having this all spread out into multiple columns, I want to combine all these. So for the manager part, the first thing I'm going to do here is work to concatenate a bunch of these fields. So let's take double bar as a concatenate field, and then we can close it with single quotes. So this is basically going to show last name, comma, space, first name as manager. And then we're also going to, we can get rid of that now. And we are going to include the employee ID here as well. So let's concatenate that in. Now put that in parentheses. And I need to concatenate in here. So this is basically going to give me their last name, comma, space, first name, space, parentheses, employee ID, close parentheses, and that's all going to be in one field called manager. So now back down to my select statement, we don't have manager last or first anymore. We just have manager. Go ahead and run that. Super, got an error here, so let's go fix that. All right, so there might be a problem up here. Oh, I see. I have like an extra concatenation there that I don't need. Manager last doesn't exist, so I'm using manager last again somewhere. Order by manager last. That doesn't exist anymore, so let's get rid of it. And there we go. So now we just have one column called manager, and it's Stephen Buchanan, employee ID 5, Andrew Fuller, employee ID 2. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the employees. Which is going to be here, because this is where we bring in the employees. So in a similar way, we're going to say last name, concatenate, comma, space, first name, and the employee ID, and we're going to do a close parentheses as employee. And I think that's okay, because I'm not joining on that anywhere. I'm not sorting on it. So I think I don't need to do any additional work there. Cool. Let's add a little space in there. Nice. So you can see now Michael Suyama, employee ID number 6, reports to Stephen Buchanan, who's employee number 5. Michael has 67 orders, and the most recent order was 24 years ago today. Perfect. So I think that pretty much does it for this session. Are there any other questions? Definitely feel free to drop them in the Discord. Let's actually flip back to the slides for 1 second. And wanted to let you guys know about the survey. Definitely could use any feedback about today's session or any questions that you might have. Feel free to drop them in here and we'll take care of it as soon as we can. And I think that kind of does it. This week's team, you can definitely follow me on Twitter over in the prediction, or definitely find me on the Discord, reach out. My online portfolio is there, bgraves.com. Also, make sure you connect with Nandu and Snow on Twitter and LinkedIn. The address is here. And we will see you guys on the Discord. Thanks all.